The first thing Zora noticed when she pulled into the driveway was that the porch light was off. She had been driving for 6 hours straight, through Georgia rain, through the flat stretch of Alabama highway that always made her feel like she was crossing into another country, and she had called ahead twice. Celestine had answered both times with the same warm, practiced voice. "We're expecting you, baby. Drive safe." But the porch light was off, and through the front window, Zora could see the blue flicker of a television and the silhouettes of people moving freely inside a house that was supposed to be hers. She sat in the car for a long moment. Didn't move. Just breathed. There was something in the air that night, late August, the kind of heat that clings even after sundown, but underneath it, something sharper. Like a room that has been sprayed to cover another smell. She had learned, over 4 years of marriage, to trust that instinct. The one that lived below her stomach and had never once been wrong. She picked up her overnight bag, walked to the front door, and knocked on her own house. Before we go any further, welcome to Morel Folktales. If this is your first time here, I am so glad you found us. We tell real stories about real pain, real strength, and real comebacks. Stories that will make you nod your head, catch your breath, and maybe send a voice note to your sister when it's over. Hit that subscribe button right now, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I want to know. Let's build this community together. Now, let's get back to Zora. Her name was Zora Adeline Pemberton Nash. The Pemberton part came from her father's side, a quiet, serious man from Savannah who had worked 31 years at the same insurance company and retired with his dignity perfectly intact. The Nash came from her mother, a woman named Delphine who had put herself through nursing school twice. Once before she got married, and once again after, when she realized she needed something that was hers alone. Between the two of them, they had given Zora one lesson above everything else. Prepare. Always. Before you need to. She had carried that lesson with her the way some women carry their grandmother's ring. Quietly, close to the skin, never taking it off. She was 43 years old when this story begins. Tall in the way that draws attention she never asks for. Brown-skinned with the kind of stillness in her face that people sometimes mistook for coldness, until she laughed, and they realized they'd been reading her wrong the entire time. She worked remotely as a senior compliance analyst for a financial consulting firm, a job that required her to read documents with the kind of attention that most people reserve for arguments. She was good at it. She was, by any measure, more than fine. She had married Darian Osei 4 years earlier, in a small ceremony on the lawn of her parents' Savannah home. Darian was charming in the way that made rooms come alive when he entered them, broad shoulders, easy laugh, the kind of man who remembered everyone's coffee order and made you feel like the most important person in whatever space you shared. She had loved him genuinely. That part matters. This is not a story about a woman who ignored every sign. It is a story about a woman who loved clearly, gave fully, and was still surprised by what she found. Because the signs, when they finally came, were not what she expected. The door opened before she could knock a second time. Celestine Osei stood in the frame, one hand on the door, the other holding a dish towel. She was a small woman, no taller than 5'2", with a face built for projecting warmth and eyes that occasionally forgot to participate. Her smile was already in place. "Zora, you made it. We were wondering when you'd get here. We were wondering." As though the house belonged to all of them equally. "I called," Zora said. Just that. 2 words, no accusation. Just a fact, delivered plainly. "Oh, I know. Come in. Don't stand out there." The house smelled like groundnut soup and something else, something floral and unfamiliar, like a candle or a perfume that didn't belong to anyone Zora recognized. She stepped inside and surveyed the living room in one slow glance. Her custom curtains, the cream ones with the embroidered border that she had ordered from a small shop in Maryland, were gone. In their place hung something cheap and burgundy that caught the lamplight wrong. Rupert, her father-in-law, was in the armchair with the television remote resting on his knee. He nodded at her the way you nod at a delivery driver. Acknowledged. Not welcomed. "Darian's upstairs," Celestine said, already turning back toward the kitchen. "He's on a call. You can put your bag in the guest room." Zora stood still for one full breath. Guest room. She was the wife. This was her house, her name on the mortgage, her credit score that had secured the interest rate, her down payment drawn from a savings account she had been building since she was 26. She was not a guest. She had never been a guest. "I'll put it in our bedroom," Zora said, her voice perfectly level. She went up the stairs, and nobody stopped her. Darian had been living with his parents for 6 weeks by then. The official reason was that his father had been recovering from a knee replacement surgery and needed help around the house. Zora had agreed. Of course she had agreed. Rupert was 68 and proud, and Darian was his only son. She had offered to come sooner, but Celestine had waved her off. Stay and work, baby. We're fine. When the 6 weeks stretched into 2 months and Darian started deflecting her questions with tired explanations and long silences on the phone, Zora had simply booked a long weekend and driven down herself. No announcement beyond the call she had made. What she found was a house that had quietly reorganized itself around someone else's comfort. The kitchen, which she and Darian had renovated together 2 summers ago, had been rearranged so completely that she spent 3 minutes looking for the coffee mugs. Celestine had moved her cast-iron pans to a low cabinet. Zora's handwritten recipe cards, which she kept in a small tin on the counter, were gone. "Mama Celestine," Zora said, carefully, the next morning. "Where are my recipe cards?" "The ones I keep in the yellow tin." Celestine was at the stove. She didn't turn around. "Oh, I probably put them somewhere. I'll look later. Can you peel those yams for me? We're having company tonight. Can you peel those yams?" "Not please. Not would you mind." Not even the performance of a question. A direction, given to her in her own kitchen, in her own house, to the sound of oil already popping in a pan she didn't recognize. Zora picked up the knife and peeled the yams. She noticed everything. She said very little. She was building a picture. The company that evening was Darian's cousin Tomide and his wife, a quiet woman named Blessing who said almost nothing at the table and kept her eyes mostly on her plate. Rupert and Darian dominated the conversation. Business, football, the memory of some trip they had taken years ago, while Celestine moved between the kitchen and the table like a conductor, filling plates, redirecting topics, patting shoulders. Zora sat at one end of the table and watched. She watched how Celestine served Darian's plate first, then Rupert's, then Tomide's, and then, only then, set the serving bowls down at the center of the table with a gesture that said the rest of you can help yourselves. She watched how Darian accepted this without a flicker of discomfort. She watched how, when she asked Darian directly about his timeline for coming home, he glanced toward his mother before answering. Just a glance. Half a second. But Zora had spent 4 years learning to read the space between Darian's words, and that glance said everything a speech could not. Later, washing dishes while Celestine dried and Blessing sat silently at the kitchen table, Zora asked a question she had been holding for weeks. "Darian mentioned he might look at a property down here. Did he say anything to you about that?" Celestine's drying slowed. "Just slightly. He's mentioned it," she said. "It makes sense, you know. His father isn't getting any younger. And the commute from up there, it's a lot." "He works remotely," Zora said. "Still, family is close. That's important." "I agree," Zora said. She handed over a clean pot. "I just wonder when he was planning to discuss it with me." Celestine smiled the way women do when they have already decided the answer to a question you haven't finished asking. "Marriage is about compromise, Zora. You'll understand when you have children." They had been trying for 2 years. Darian knew this. Celestine knew this. That sentence was not accidental. Zora turned off the tap, dried her hands, and said, "Good night, Mama Celestine." She went upstairs. She did not cry. She opened her laptop and she worked for 2 hours, because work was the one space in her life where her value had never required anyone else's confirmation. The next morning brought one of those southern Augusts that feel personal, the sky white with heat before 9 o'clock, the air so thick it felt like wearing something. Darian was still asleep when Zora came downstairs. She poured herself coffee, took it to the back porch, and sat alone with the kind of quiet that happens before a decision gets made. She had been willing to give this marriage every good faith effort she had. She had driven 6 hours on a Friday night after a full work week because she believed in fighting for what she'd built. She had tolerated the reorganized kitchen, the guest room suggestion, the recipe cards that had probably gone somewhere. She had bitten her tongue at a dinner table where she was served last in her own home. But she was her mother's daughter, and Delphine had taught her that patience was not the same as surrender, that watching was not the same as accepting. She had been watching, and what she had seen, over these 2 months, had quietly crystallized into a shape she recognized. Darian was not just visiting his parents. Darian was drifting, and his family, not cruelly, not even consciously, but with the kind of ease that comes from never having been challenged, had decided that Zora's place in this marriage was decorative, that she was a woman who had done well for herself, had married their son, and could now be gradually repositioned to the edges of the life she had built. They had mistaken her quietness for weakness. That was the last mistake they would make. She found the phone by accident. That afternoon, while Darian was showering and she was looking for a phone charger in the drawer of the nightstand, his side, not hers, her hand landed on a phone she didn't recognize. Not Darian's regular phone. A second one. Thin, older model, the kind you could buy prepaid. The screen lit up when she moved it. She stood very still. She was not the kind of woman who snooped. That mattered to her. for reasons that went deeper than principle. Her dignity lived partly in the fact that she had always dealt with what was in front of her, not what she was afraid to find. But the phone was already in her hand. The screen was already lit. There was one notification visible on the lock screen. A text message from a number saved only as T. It said, "Did you tell her yet?" Zora set the phone back exactly where she'd found it, closed the drawer, walked to the window, and looked out at the backyard, at the garden Celestine had planted along the fence, at the fig tree Rupert had been tending since before Zora even knew this family existed. She did not confront Darian that night. Not because she was afraid, and not because she needed more information. She had enough. She needed something else entirely. If you're still watching at this point, pause for 1 second and type the words "still here" in the comments. Because this story is about to go somewhere most people don't expect, and I want to know who's riding with Zora all the way to the end. The name on the other end of that message had been saved as T, and though Zora had no proof yet, there was one name that had surfaced exactly once in the last 2 months, mentioned by Darian's cousin Tomide with just enough casualness to be suspicious. Tamsin, a woman who had apparently grown up in the same neighborhood as Darian, had moved back to the area recently, and had, according to Tomide, been around, helping out with Uncle Rupert's recovery. Said with a small smile, and eyes pointed somewhere to the left of honesty. Zora had filed it. Said nothing. Watched. She went for a walk the following morning and ended up on the street 2 blocks over, where the older houses had wide front porches and neighbors who knew everything about everyone. She had met Ms. Odessa Bray once, briefly, at a block association meeting the previous spring, and remembered her because she had the kind of face that didn't pretend. Ms. Odessa was on her porch, watering a hanging fern. "Morning," Zora called. Ms. Odessa looked up, recognized her, and did something interesting. She didn't smile first. She just looked at Zora with the evaluating stillness of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation. "Morning, baby," she said. "Come sit with me." They sat together for 40 minutes. Ms. Odessa brought out sweet tea that was so strong it was almost medicine. She talked about the weather. She talked about Rupert's recovery. She talked about the neighborhood. And then, slowly, with the precision of someone who has decided to finally say something she has been turning over for a while, she talked about what she had seen. A car in the driveway on Wednesday nights, when Zora was in another city. A woman, younger, with braids, who parked at an angle like she owned the curb. Celestine opening the front door for her. Not surprised. Not reluctant. Opening the door. "I don't tell other people's business," Ms. Odessa said, setting down her glass. "But I raised 3 daughters. And I always told them, if someone knows the truth about your life and says nothing while you suffer, that's not neutrality. That's a choice." She looked at Zora directly. "She's been in that house at least 4 times that I've counted. And Mama Ose, she feeds her." The fig tree in the backyard had been planted the year Rupert and Celestine arrived in this city, Darian had told her once. "It's ours," he'd said. "Everything about this property is ours." Zora had thought he meant theirs together. She understood now that he had always meant something else. She drove back to the house slowly. Not because she was gathering herself. She was already gathered. She had been gathered since the moment she found the phone, maybe longer. Maybe since the curtains. Maybe since the first time Celestine said guest room with that particular lightness in her voice, as if the word held nothing sharp. She sat in the driveway again. Same spot as the first night. This time, she wasn't reading the house. She was already past it. She opened her phone and made 2 calls before she went inside. The first was to her attorney, a woman named Vivian who had handled her father's estate and who Zora had kept on a quiet retainer for reasons she had explained to no one, not even her mother. The second call was to her financial advisor, who confirmed what Zora had asked her to confirm, that the account transfers she had quietly restructured 3 weeks ago had cleared without issue. Then she went inside. Darian was in the kitchen with his mother. He looked up when she came in, and something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition of someone who has been running a calculation and just realized one of the numbers is wrong. "Hey," he said. "We were just about to." "I need to talk to you," Zora said. "Just you." Celestine's hands went still on the counter. "Whatever you have to say, you can." "Mama," Darian said. Soft. Final. Celestine left the room, but Zora could hear her stop just past the doorway. She didn't say anything about it. She sat down at the kitchen table. Not across from Darian. Beside him. Close. The way you sit with someone when you've decided to be honest. "Tell me about Tamsin," she said. The pause that followed was the length of a confession. "It's not what, it didn't," he stopped. Started again. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how," Zora said. "Tell me the truth. Right now. Not the version that explains it away. The truth." He told her. It had started 8 weeks ago, almost to the day he moved back into this house. Not before, he insisted, and she believed him, though it hardly mattered now. They had grown up together, lost touch, reconnected when he came back to help with his father. It was complicated, he said. He hadn't meant for it to go as far as it had. He hadn't told Zora because he hadn't known what to say. And then time kept passing, and it got harder. Did your mother know? Zora asked. The pause again. She met her, he said. Did she know? He looked at his hands. Yes. From beyond the doorway, there was no sound. But Zora felt the weight of someone listening, and she let the silence sit. What followed was not a fight. Zora had no interest in a fight. A fight would have required her to be surprised, and she was beyond surprise now. What she felt was something quieter and more absolute. The settling of a truth that had been floating, untethered, finally dropping into place. She stood up. I want to show you something, she said. She went upstairs to her overnight bag and came back with a manila folder. She set it on the kitchen table between them without drama. Inside was a 2-inch stack of paper. That's the mortgage, she said. In my name. My credit. My down payment. Drawn entirely from an account that existed before this marriage and never commingled with joint funds. She set a finger on the next document without opening it. That's the independent legal review I had done on our marital assets 18 days ago. When you told me you were thinking about a property down here, and I realized no one had thought to include me in that conversation. Darian stared at the folder. And this, she said, setting a single printed page on top, is a letter confirming my name on a 3-bedroom property in Savannah. Purchased in my name only, financed through a line of credit my father left me. That closed 11 days ago. She had not been idle during these 2 months. She had been preparing. The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the fig tree moving in the breeze through the screen door. I'm not angry, Darian, she said. I'm clear. There's a difference. Celestine appeared in the doorway. She was no longer pretending she hadn't been there. Her face had lost its composed pleasantness, and what was underneath was something Zora found more honest and more sad, fear. Not remorse exactly, but fear. The kind that comes when a woman realizes she has underestimated someone she had privately dismissed. Zora, she said, let's just sit down and talk. As a family. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Zora said. That's been the thing about me all along. I never had to. Everything I did for this family, I chose. She let that sit. I drove 6 hours every time your son asked me to. I sent money for your husband's surgery before Darian even finished explaining what happened. I sent it that same hour, from my personal account, because I believed in this family. I peeled yams in my own kitchen while you moved my things to make room for someone else's comfort. I smiled at tables where I was served last. I said nothing about curtains and recipe cards in guest rooms. She paused. I said nothing because I was being a wife. I was being the woman I committed to being. She picked up the manila folder. But I was also watching. Celestine opened her mouth. Closed it. I never wanted your son's family to be my enemy, Zora said. And for the first time something genuinely soft came into her voice. Not weakness, but something adjacent to grief. The grief of a woman who had genuinely wanted to belong somewhere and had been quietly told, over and over, that she did not. I wanted to belong here. I tried. You know I tried. Darian's eyes were wet. She looked at him for a long moment. You let them diminish me, she said. And you said nothing. That's the part one won't forgive. Not the other woman. You. Your silence. Rupert appeared last. He came from the living room with his cane, slower than the others, and he stood in the entrance to the kitchen and looked at the scene his family had made. And something in his face, older than pride, underneath all the armor of a patriarch who had held his world together with the force of his own certainty, that something cracked just slightly. He looked at the folder in Zora's hand. He looked at his son. He looked at his wife. And then, and this was the thing no one in that room would ever entirely forget, he said, Celestine. One word. Her name. In a tone she had probably not heard from him in years. The tone of a man realizing that a war was fought in his name, without his full understanding of the cost. Celestine looked at the floor. Zora, Rupert said, his voice rough and low. I didn't know about the woman. I want you to know that. I believe you, Zora said. And she did. What my wife did is between you and your wife, Zora said quietly. That's not mine to carry. She picked up her bag from the bottom of the stairs where she had left it. She zipped it. She checked for her keys. I'll have my attorney contact yours next week, she said to Darian. The process doesn't have to be ugly. I don't want that. But it will be thorough. She looked at him one last time. Took him in, the way you look at something you love for the last time. I hope you find what you were looking for. I genuinely do. She walked to the front door. She opened it herself. And she did not look back. What came next was not a sudden explosion of drama. It unfolded the way these things do in real life, slowly, sometimes painfully, in the steady language of legal documents and financial statements and long-distance phone calls that both said more and less than anyone meant them to. Darian contested very little. There was very little to contest. Zora's attorney, Vivian, who had a gift for precision that Zora deeply admired, presented the marital asset review like a textbook. Organized, clear, undeniable. The house had been purchased with Zora's funds and credit. The joint accounts held far less than Darian had assumed, because Zora had been thoughtfully, quietly, and entirely legally restructuring her financial footprint for the better part of 2 months. Not out of vengeance. Out of foresight. Her father had told her once, the time to prepare is before the storm. During the storm, you're just trying to survive. She had prepared. The Savannah property, the 3-bedroom with the deep front porch and the magnolia tree in the yard, had been hers outright before the marriage ended. She moved into it on a Saturday in October, when the Georgia light fell at that particular autumn angle that makes everything look like it was painted. Her mother came down to help. Her younger brother Theo drove a truck. Ms. Odessa sent a plant, a small potted fig, with a card that said only, for your new porch. It made Zora laugh, quietly and fully, for the first time in months. Celestine called 3 times in the weeks that followed. The first call was explanatory. She hadn't meant for things to go this way. She had only been trying to protect her son. There were things about Tamsin's situation that Zora didn't understand, and Zora listened. Let her finish. Said, I hear you, Mama Celestine, and meant it. Then said, I hope your family finds its peace, and ended the call. The second call was apologetic. Shorter. Celestine's voice had lost its architectural confidence by then. It was smaller, genuinely uncertain. She said she had not realized how much Zora had actually contributed. Financially, practically, emotionally. She said she had looked her up, and had not known until then the full scope of what Zora did professionally. Had not known about the quiet charitable donations Zora had made each year to Rupert's church. Had not known about the Medical Research Foundation grant that Zora had helped secure through professional connections, a grant that had funded Rupert's physical therapy coverage. She had not known any of it, because Zora had never said. You never told us, Celestine said. Why didn't you ever say? Because that's not why I did it, Zora said. The third call, Zora didn't answer. She was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the magnolia tree, and when the phone buzzed with Celestine's number, she set it face down on the armrest and finished her coffee instead. She had given what she had to give. She had no more to offer. That was not bitterness. It was simply the truth of what was left, and the truth was worth more to her now than any amount of performed reconciliation. She was done performing. 3 months later, Zora received an unexpected letter. It came in a plain envelope, handwritten address. Rupert's handwriting, she thought, though she wasn't certain. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No salutation. Just a paragraph, written in the careful script of a man not accustomed to expressing himself this way. I have been sitting with shame. Not for my son's choices. Those are his to answer for. But for how my wife and I treated you in your own home. We saw a quiet woman and decided, without asking, that quiet meant less. I am old enough to know better. I did not do better. I am sorry. Truly. You deserved a family who recognized what they had been given. R.O. Zora read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the same small tin where she had once kept her recipe cards. She did not throw it away. She did not share it. She kept it, the way you keep something that arrived too late to change anything but still, somehow, mattered. The Savannah house took shape over the following months like something alive. Zora repainted the front room a deep, quiet green, the color of the good ferns her grandmother used to keep, the color of growing things. She put her grandmother's oval mirror in the hallway, the one with the gilt frame that had spent the last 4 years in a storage unit because Celestine's aesthetic didn't do antiques. She cooked in her kitchen at whatever hour she pleased, and nobody asked her to peel anything. She worked. She traveled twice for conferences, one in Chicago, one in Philadelphia, and she came back to a house that smelled exactly the way she'd left it, because it was hers, and it kept her scent. She was not lonely. She had been more lonely inside that marriage than she had imagined possible. Her mother came to visit in December and stood in the front room with her hands on her hips and said, "This is you, baby. This whole house is you. I can feel it." Zora made her mother sit in the good chair and cooked a meal that took 3 hours and tasted like every recipe card she had ever written. She had rebuilt the tin from scratch. Every recipe, rewritten. Better now. Her handwriting was more sure. She did not follow what happened between Darian and Tamsin. She heard things through peripheral channels, the way you do when you've left a place but some of its gravity still reaches you. She heard it hadn't lasted. She heard Darian had moved out of his parents' house eventually, found an apartment. She heard that Celestine and Rupert had their own reckoning to have, about what the wife had done, about what it had cost. None of it changed anything for Zora. It confirmed things she had already suspected, but she had stopped needing confirmation. She was too far into her own life to spend it narrating someone else's consequences. Ms. Odessa called once, in the spring. "I heard the house sold," she said. "It did," Zora confirmed. "Good price. Very good price." There was a pause on the line that felt satisfied, the way an older woman's silence can when she has seen a thing go right that she hoped would. "You doing good, baby?" Ms. Odessa asked. "I am," Zora said. "I really am." Here is what Zora understood by the end of it. Not what she was told, and not what she performed understanding of, but what she knew, in her body, after everything. She understood that the people who had treated her like a servant had done so not because she was small, but because they needed her to be. Her competence threatened something in them. Her quietness had been misread as permission. And her dignity, the thing that kept her from screaming, from begging, from making scenes, had been mistaken for an absence of fire. They were wrong about the fire. It was just banked. It burned clean, and low, and long. She understood that love, real love, given freely and fully, is not diminished by the fact that the wrong person received it, that the years she had given were not wasted. They had formed her, refined something in her. She was better at knowing herself than she had ever been, and that knowledge had not come for free. She understood that preparation is its own form of love, self-love, specifically, the kind that says, "I don't know what's coming, but I will not be destroyed by it." Her mother had taught her that. Delphine, who had gone back to nursing school after her marriage because she needed something that was hers alone. Zora had something that was hers alone now. Several things, in fact. And on a Saturday morning in May, sitting on the savannah porch with coffee and the particular warmth of early southern spring, the magnolia tree just coming into bloom, and the street quiet except for birds, she felt something she had not felt in so long it took her a moment to name it. Not joy exactly. Something steadier. Something that didn't depend on anyone else's behavior or anyone else's recognition. She sat with it for a long time. The magnolia opened. She had spent years being the woman who made others comfortable in spaces she had built. The day she stopped, the space finally became a home. The tree in her yard that spring had roots that reached deeper than anyone could see. So did she. If you made it to the end of this story, drop a comment below. Tell me what hit you hardest. Was it the curtains? The recipe cards? The moment she walked out of her own front door without looking back? Or was it Rupert's letter that got you? I read every single comment. Every one. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more. New stories drop every day. And share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. You know who they are.